Hello everyone, thanks for joining the session today. My name is Scott Koenig. I'm a full-time law enforcement officer with the Nevada State Police. I've been in law enforcement for the last 17 years. The last 6 years I've been a full-time digital forensic examiner / analyst. Today what I'd like to talk about is some testing and validation that I did to help another analyst, and then how that testing and validation material was published then via DFIR review. What I'll talk about today is the settings for the iOS device display auto lock settings and the required passcode setting. As we can see on the screen, I'm basically just navigating and showing you how and where these settings are located within the device. What you'll notice is that this device being displayed is an iPhone 12 with iOS 16 installed. So that's my most recent test device. I've been doing some recent testing on iOS 16. So a lot of the examples that you'll see here today were from iOS 16. So let's review some background from the testing. So a fellow analyst contacted me and he advised that he believed he found the settings file for the display auto lock and then for the required passcode setting. He wanted some help validating his findings, and he had sent me the information that he had so far and requested that I conduct a test also to see if our results matched. Continuing with the background, the fellow analyst, he provided me with the file system location and the file property list name that he believed contained these settings. So what we can see at the bottom of the screen is the file path along with the top part within the PowerPoint, and then we can also see the property list highlighted there within that file system location. The screenshot that we're looking at there is Artifact Examiner, or also called ARDEX, from Ian Whiffen. So while reviewing this property list, we also found some other settings for the device that wasn't tested and validated for this particular research. And those included the length of the passcode and several other things, which you'll see the keys for. Here on the screen we can see a snapshot of the property list. We can see all the keys listed within that property list, and we're going to talk about the restrictive value key and its subkeys. So we can see the max inactivity and the max grace period are going to be the keys, or that's where the data lives for these settings that we're going to talk about for that research. So the max inactivity, that's going to be your screen display, and then the max grace period is going to be your required passcode setting. So by looking at this property list, we can see a value for the max inactivity of 120, and then it also has a range minimum. And then for the max grace period, we can see a value of 0, and it also has a range maximum and a range minimum. We'll talk about those when we did the testing. I'll go over those in detail later on. So next I'll talk about the testing and interpretation of the data. So during the specific testing for this research and publication of the DFR review article, there were 6 tests that were conducted. After the 6th test, I was satisfied that we had determined what the settings meant and what the values could be translated as. Another consideration is the number of tests needed to be able to validate and show repeated successful results. As I mentioned before, I conducted 6 tests, and after the 6th test, I was successful in showing repeated results that had the same values, same interpretation, meaning that we saw what was in the settings, we saw what was in the P list, and I was satisfied that we made that translation successful. So what we see here for the next 6 slides will be a short video of the device activity, what I did on the device. We'll see what's in the property list, and then we'll see what the results were over on the left-hand side of the screen. So in this example, this is test 1. So this device that you see on the screen isn't the original iPhone 6s Plus device that I used for testing. This is a repeated test for this presentation, but I used the same settings that I used in the original testing just to show you what you may see on a device and in the property list. What you'll notice later on is that there's going to be an iPhone 12 with iOS 16 installed on it. So part of the testing and validation is I said, well, let's go ahead and test iOS 16 and let's see what that looks like. So for the first test, we can see that there was no passcode on the device. The display auto lock was set to 2 minutes and the required passcode was not set. Now you're going to see a little bit different results, or a little bit different in this testing, because the original test 1 was done on a factory reset device. So at that time there was no passcode and a passcode had never been set. So when we see that value of 0 and that the passcode wasn't set, that was the prior setting. So that was the default setting when I factory reset the device. So in this case, you can see how these don't really match up. So we have max inactivity. So that's our display auto lock saying, hey, the max inactivity is 2 minutes or 120 seconds. And then we can also see the max grace period. So the required passcode is set to 14,400 seconds, which is 4 hours. So let's take a look at the device. So we're going to look at the settings within this iOS 14 device. Then we're going to go to the display and brightness setting, and then we're going to scroll down and we're going to see that the auto lock is set to 2 minutes, as I've stated before. So we can see now the value is listed as 120, so that's 120 seconds. So all that matches up. So then we can see there the minimum range, or the range minimum. What I highlighted is 30 seconds. We can see all the options listed there for the auto lock, display auto lock, and the minimum setting is 30 seconds. So I'm just pointing out that range minimum value. So we can see what I'm going to point that out. Let's stop that and back that up for a minute. So what I'm going to point out here is that the biometric locks are turned off on this device, meaning that you cannot use your Face ID or fingerprint ID if this were a fingerprint or biometric ID. The iPhone unlock is turned off. Now all the rest of them are also turned off, but the highlight of this testing is this iPhone Face ID. Now I'm highlighting this in the presentation. This wasn't initially discovered during my initial write-up. This was only discovered after one of the reviewers from DFIR Review pointed out this fact that I had isolated that iPhone 6s Plus and I had mentioned the Touch ID and the Touch ID lock. And then he recommended, or the person recommended, that I research or do some additional research into the Face ID or biometric unlock, which I did, which was a very good addition to the research. And I'll explain that here, but I wanted to point this out because it is kind of important later on down the road. So we can see that required passcode is turned off. So right now the passcode, this device does not have a passcode, and we can see the required passcode setting is 4 hours, after 4 hours. Now that was the last setting on this device. So given that it was the last setting was after 4 hours, we can see that value over here in the property list is set to 14,400, meaning that that was the last setting. That isn't the current setting, but that was the last setting before the device was acquired. And then we can see the range minimum and the range maximum. So in that list of settings, we know that the range minimum should be 0, which is immediately, and the range maximum is 4 hours. So there shouldn't be any settings outside of those 4 hours. But right now that value is grayed out, so we can't change it. So let's see what we have to do to be able to change that. Now we're going to go on to test 2. So we can highlight over here. In this test we had a device that had a 6-digit passcode. The display auto lock was set to 30 seconds, and the required passcode was set to immediately. So then the value in the property list for the max inactivity is 30 seconds, and the max grace period is 0. So we can see that over here, max grace period is 0, and then the max inactivity is 30 seconds. So let's take a look at the device. So we can see this is an iOS 16 device. We'll go into the settings. We're going to take a look at the display brightness. We're going to see that that's set to 30 seconds. And then we'll back out and look at the Face ID required passcode, which we can indicate there. It's the max grace period. And we can see that that value, that biometric face lock is turned on. We now have a passcode and it's set to immediately. But notice there aren't any other settings there. So we've already said that the range can be up to 4 hours. So why wasn't that listed in the settings? So here we can go ahead and turn off the biometric face lock, and then that will present us with all our other options. So we can see that that's turned off, and then that gave us our other options. So let's go on to test 3. So here for test 3, we have a 6-digit passcode. We have a display auto lock set to never, and then we have a required passcode says 1 minute. What I'm going to highlight or point out in this test is this 214748367. Well, that's a timestamp, and that's a Apple absolute timestamp in UTC. So that's our January 1, 2001 timestamp. So for whatever reason, when your display auto lock is set to never, that's going to be your value in your max activity. It's going to be that absolute time. So let's take a look at the device. So we're going to go into that display brightness. We're going to scroll down and look at that auto lock to never. And then we're going to look at that value in the property list, and we can see that it's that absolute timestamp. So then we're going to look at the required passcode setting. It's 60 seconds, which we should know this by knowing that it's going to be 1 minute. So we can go into the settings. That should also tell us that the Face ID or the Face Unlock is turned off because the value is set to something other than 0. So test 6 is a little bit different. So test 6, there's no passcode on the device. The display auto lock is set to 2 minutes. The required passcode is set to 5 minutes. And then you can see the second values there. So just highlighting this property list, this is with everything not collapsed. So we're going to walk through this property list and we're going to uncollapse them and take a look at them. So we're going to look for that public effective user settings plist. We're going to look for that restrictive value. And then we're going to look at the max grace period, the max inactivity, and we're also going to check out the minimum length, which just shows you what the minimum length of the passcode can be. So again, we're just reviewing those settings within the device again, showing that these things matched up. And again, like I said, as you guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about it, so after the 6th test, I was like, yep, I think I've got this figured out, and I think this is ready that we can move forward and publish the results. And I couldn't have done this or the DFI review process without the reviewers. So I wanted to take a couple seconds here just to say, hey, thanks, throw their names up there. I appreciate them. I don't know who they are. I don't think I've ever talked to any of these people listed here under the review process. So I really thank their work and the effort that they put in to be able to review the information that I provided to DFI Review. And so thanks to you. And I believe they're all volunteers. So I really appreciate their volunteer and willing to publish things for the community. So again, this is my presentation. My name is Scott Koenig. There's an email. If you have any questions that we don't answer today, feel free to email me at any time. And then also my blog, so theforensicscooter.com. You can research some other blogs and other things that I've published on my blog. And then I post things on Twitter. So if I publish a blog on my website there, it's going to be mentioned on my Twitter account. So there's my Twitter account with some QR codes to be able to get access to those very easily. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this helped you out, or I hope this may help other examiners and analysts in the future with trying to find these settings. Thank you, and I think we're going to take a couple questions. Thanks.